The dog would not let anyone near her. That was the first thing the paramedics said when they radioed ahead to Sault Ste. Marie General. Not that the woman was running a fever that had climbed past 40 degrees. Not that her blood pressure had bottomed out somewhere on the logging road where they'd found her truck. The first thing they said was, "The dog will not let anyone near her." Sergeant Céline Fournier had been alone for 2 years, 3 months and 11 days. She hadn't counted, not deliberately, but the number lived somewhere behind her sternum anyway, the way old injuries do. She'd bought the property outside Chapleau, because nobody went to Chapleau unless they had to. 40 minutes of gravel road past the last gas station. Crown land on 3 sides. The kind of quiet that swallowed you whole if you let it. She'd let it. The cabin wasn't much. 2 rooms, a wood stove that ate through a quarter cord a week in January, and a porch that looked out over a frozen creek that didn't have a name on any map she'd found. She'd fixed the roof herself that first autumn, chased a black bear off the property with a flashlight, and a Malinois named Fable, who weighed 38 kilograms and had completed 3 tours of Afghanistan before either of them came home. Fable had been Corporal Devon Ashcroft's dog first. That was the part Céline didn't let herself think about too much. She'd woken up wrong that morning. The kind of wrong she'd learned not to ignore in the field, where the body knew things before the mind caught up. Her joints ached past what the cold could explain. There was a heat behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the wood stove. She'd catalogued her symptoms the way she'd been trained to, methodically, without panic. Fever, chills that spiked and then vanished, a tenderness along her right side that had been building for 3 days, and that she'd told herself was a pulled muscle from splitting birch. It wasn't a pulled muscle. She made it to the truck. She didn't remember deciding to go, just that she was in the driver's seat with her keys in her hand and Fable pressed against her right thigh, his eyes tracking her face the way he always did when something was wrong. He'd ridden in the back on every drive since she'd had him. That morning he climbed into the front without being asked. She made it 18 kilometers down the logging road before her vision started to agree at the edges. She pulled over. She didn't pass out. She refused to pass out, but she sat with her forehead against the wheel for what felt like minutes and slin herself up, breathing through it, telling herself not yet, not here. A forestry crew found her. 2 men from Mississauga who were up checking a cut block and who had not expected to find a woman in a Canadian Forces jacket, sitting very still in a truck with a dog staring at them through the windshield like a loaded weapon. They called 911. When the paramedics arrived, Fable let Céline be loaded onto a gurney, but only barely, and only because she spoke to him in a quiet, flat voice and touched his head with one hand. When one of the paramedics tried to move him to secure the gurney, Fable's lip pulled back exactly far enough to make his point. He rode in the ambulance with her. Nobody argued. The ER at Sault General was not built for this. It was built for snowmobile accidents and cardiac events, and the occasional construction injury from the mills. It was not built for a sedated ex-military working dog, occupying the corner of Bay 4, like he owned it, tracking every person who came within 3 meters of the woman on the bed. Dr. Priya Mehta had been on shift for 11 hours when they brought Céline in. She was 34, originally from Thunder Bay, and she'd done a year of emergency medicine in Kandahar as a civilian contractor before she'd come back to Northern Ontario and decided she preferred the snowmobile accidents. She'd seen military working dogs before. She understood, in a clinical sense, what Fable was doing. Understanding it didn't make it easier to treat the patient. Céline's blood work came back fast and ugly. Pyelonephrititis that had tipped into early sepsis, a kidney infection that had been sitting unaddressed long enough to start throwing bacteria into the bloodstream. Her temperature was 40.3. Her white count was climbing. She needed IV antibiotics immediately and fluids and monitoring, and every time Dr. Mehta or one of the nurses got close enough to do any of that, Fable rose from his crouch in the corner and placed himself between them and the bed with the quiet, total certainty of a dog who had been trained to guard a body and intended to do exactly that. "He's not going to bite," Celine said. Her voice was rough, her eyes glassy with fever. "He'll tell you clearly before he bites. He's telling you clearly right now." "What does clearly mean?" asked Nurse Dominique Archambault, who was 31 and from Timmins and had an excellent poker face. "It means don't try to go around him." Dominique looked at the dog. The dog looked at Dominique. His ears were forward, his body was still. He had the particular stillness of something that was not relaxed. "Okay," Dominique said. "What does he respond to? My commands, or someone he trusts? Does he trust anyone here?" Celine closed her eyes. The question hung in the air for a moment. "No," she said, "not anymore." The anymore was the part that got Dr. Mehta. She noted it without comment and excused herself to the hallway to think. The problem was straightforward and terrible. And Celine needed treatment that required access to her body, and Fable was not going to allow access to her body, and Celine herself was fading in and out in a way that meant her ability to manage Fable was going to decrease as the hours passed. If they sedated the dog, they needed a veterinarian to do it safely, and the nearest emergency vet clinic was in Sudbury, 90 minutes away. If they waited for Sudbury, Celine's condition would worsen. If they tried to physically restrain Fable, someone would get hurt, possibly seriously, and the dog would almost certainly injure himself in the process, which Priya suspected Celine would find unacceptable. She was standing in the hallway working through these options when the elevator opened, and a woman in a blue Parks Canada jacket stepped out pulling a rolling carry-on and looking like she'd been traveling for about 9 hours. The woman stopped. She looked at Priya. She looked at the number on Bay 4's door. "Is she in there?" The woman said. "I'm sorry. Are you family? I'm her sister." She was already moving. "I flew into Sudbury this morning. Someone from the forestry company called our mother. Is she okay?" "She's stable," Priya said carefully, "but there's a complication." The woman, her name was Justine Fournier, she said, and she said it the way people say their name when they're trying not to sound as frightened as they are, stopped in front of Bay 4's door and looked through the small window at the shape on the bed and the large, motionless dog in the corner. "That's Fable," she said. "You know him. I've met him twice." Justine set down her carry-on. "He doesn't like me. Has he ever met anyone he does like other than your sister?" Justine was quiet for a moment. She had Celine's same jaw, Priya noticed. Set at the same angle, the same quality of composure that was clearly costing something. "Devon," Justine said. "Devon Ashcroft. He was Fable's handler first. Celine adopted him after Devon was killed." She paused. "In Kandahar, 2023. Priya absorbed this. "Is there anyone who knew Devon? Anyone who might have a connection to the dog through him?" "I don't know who Devon's people were. I only met him a few times before." Justine stopped. "His family is in Manitoba, I think. Somewhere around Brandon." "We don't have time for Brandon," Priya said quietly. They stood there for a moment. In Bay 4, Fable hadn't moved. "He responds to military commands," Celine had said. "Commands from someone he trusts." Priya thought about the year in Kandahar. She thought about the handlers she'd watched, the way they moved around the dogs, the language of it. She thought about one afternoon in particular, standing near the wire with a coffee going cold in her hand, watching a shepherd named something she couldn't remember sit perfectly still while his handler crouched beside him and said something low, barely audible, even from 2 meters away. She'd asked what the command was afterward. The handler had spelled it out for her, laughing a little. Because she'd asked so seriously. She had not thought about it in 3 years. She went back to Bay 4's door. Dominique had managed to get one IV line in during a window when Celine had spoken to Fable and held his collar, but the fluids were running slow. Because every time Dominique tried to adjust the drip, Fable shifted his weight and Dominique stopped moving. The antibiotic bag was hanging untouched. Celine's temperature had climbed another half-degree. "I'm going to try something," Priya said. Dominique looked at her. "What kind of something? Either it works or it doesn't." Priya stepped fully into the bay and let the door swing shut behind her. She stood where Fable could see her completely. His eyes moved to her immediately. Brown, calm, absolutely fixed. She stood still for a moment. She took one breath and let it out slowly. Then she said the word. It was the German command for at ease, ruhig, spoken the way she'd heard it said that afternoon near the wire, low and certain, with the particular rhythm that meant, "I know this language. I know what you are. You can stand down now." Fable's ears moved, not dramatically. Just a fraction, rotation across his shoulders shifting like a question being considered. Priya said it again. Ruhig. And then, because she wasn't sure that was enough, because she'd only heard it said once and hadn't thought about it in 3 years, she added the other thing the handler had said afterward, the thing she'd almost not caught. Guter Junge. Good boy. Fable looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down, not completely relaxed. He kept his eyes on her, and his body stayed angled toward the bed, but he sat, and his lip was down, and the room changed. The temperature of it changed. Dominique exhaled very quietly through her nose. Celine had been watching from the bed. Her eyes were half closed with fever and something else. Surprise, maybe, or the specific emotion that doesn't have a name in English, the one that arrives when the thing you thought was lost turns out to have been carried quietly by someone who didn't know they were carrying it. "Where did you learn that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Kandahar," Priya said. 2021. There was a handler. His dog was called Sergeant, which I always thought was a little on the nose. She moved to the antibiotic bag and adjusted the drip, watching Feeble as she did. He watched her back. He stayed seated. He explained the commands to me one afternoon. "I don't know why I remembered. Devon used the same commands," Celine said. "He trained mostly with German units. Said it was cleaner that way. The dogs don't get confused if civilians shout English commands at them. Smart. He was." A pause. "He was the smartest person I've ever known." Priya finished with the drip and pulled a stool to the side of the bed. Not because she needed to stay. The antibiotics would do their work now. But because she'd heard the weight in those 4 words, and she'd been Kandahar, and she knew what the weight meant. "You served with him," she said. "It wasn't really a question. We were in the same unit for 2 years. I was his team lead for the last 8 months. Priya waited. "He died on a route clearance, IED. Fable survived because he was 10 meters ahead. A long pause. I was the one who called the route clear." The bay was very quiet. Outside, the ER moved and buzzed, and someone down the hall asked about their discharge papers, and in Bay 4 everything was still. "You called it clear based on the intelligence you had," Priya said. "Yes, and the intelligence was wrong. Yes, and you've been in Chapleau for 2 years." Celine turned her head and looked at Priya directly for the first time. Her eyes were fever-bright and very dark. "You're a doctor, not a therapist." "I'm a doctor who spent a year in Kandahar," Priya said evenly. "And I have a patient running a temperature of 40.8 degrees who drove herself off a logging road rather than ask for help. So I'm taking some liberties." He was still watching her, but his body had settled further, the rigid attention slowly softening into something that looked almost like ordinary tiredness. "He's been protecting you. That's his job." "Maybe. But I don't think that's all it is." She looked back at Celine. "I think he's been waiting. Waiting for what?" Priya thought about it. "For you to stop protecting him back." Celine said nothing. Her jaw tightened in the way that meant something had landed somewhere it hurt. Justine was allowed into the bay an hour later, after Fable had been given water and a folded blanket from the supply closet, and had accepted both from Priya, with a composure that Dominique described afterward as honestly more dignity than most of my patients. He moved from his corner to the foot of the bed and lay down there with his chin on the rail, keeping one eye on the door and one eye on Celine, and this seemed to satisfy everyone, including himself. Justine sat in the chair by the window and didn't try to fill the silence immediately, which told Priya that Justine had spent some years learning how to be near her sister. "You scared the hell out of Maman," Justine said eventually. "I didn't mean to. You never mean to, but it wasn't an accusation. She's been calling me every week since you went up there. She thinks you disappeared." "I didn't disappear. I just went somewhere no one could follow you." Justine looked at her hands. "I know why. I'm not arguing with you about why. I just think." She stopped. "I think Devon would think you were taking it too far." Celine's eyes went flat. "Don't, Celine. Don't tell me what Devon would think. You met him 3 times. I know. I'm sorry." Justine folded her hands in her lap. "I'm sorry. That was wrong." A long pause. Fable's tail moved once against the bed rail, a slow, single sweep that might have meant anything. "He told me once," Celine said, "that the worst thing a handler could do was make a dog feel like the mission was over when it wasn't. That the dog would shut down, stop trying." She wasn't looking at Justine. She was looking at Fable. "He said the way you kept them going was to act like there was still something worth doing, even when there wasn't." Justine asked quietly. Celine was quiet for a long moment. Fable lifted his head from the bed rail and looked at her. Not the alert, watchful look he'd worn all day. Something different. Patient, as if he had been waiting for exactly this question and was prepared to wait considerably longer for the answer. "Maybe," Celine said. "Maybe there is." The fever broke at 2:47 in the morning. Priya was at the nursing station finishing her charts when Dominique came out of Bay 4 and said it plainly, without drama, the way good nurses deliver good news. Celine's temperature was 38.1 and dropping. Her pressure had stabilized. She'd eaten half a cup of broth and asked for her phone. "How's the dog?" Priya asked. "Asleep," Dominique said. "First time he's had his eyes closed since they brought her in." Priya set down her pen. She thought about the word she'd said in Bay 4, the one she'd carried for 3 years without knowing she was carrying it, the way you carry things that don't seem important when you pick them up, a German command spoken by a stranger near a wire in Afghanistan. Ruhig, at ease. She thought about Celine calling the route clear. She thought about Devon Ashcroft, whom she had never met, who had trained his dog with German commands because it was cleaner that way, and who had apparently trusted Celine Fournier with his entire unit, and, in the end, with the dog he'd loved. She thought that trust was a strange thing to carry forward, that sometimes it moved through people who didn't know they held it. A command, a word, a way of standing still in a doorway so a grieving dog could decide whether to let you through. She went back to Bay 4. Fable opened his eyes when she entered. Old habit, probably, or just the particular alertness of a working dog who didn't completely turn off even in sleep. He looked at her, then he put his head back down on the foot of the bed, on top of Celine's feet, where he'd positioned himself some time in the last hour. Celine was awake. The fever light was gone from her eyes. She looked exhausted in the honest way, not the desperate, hollow way she'd looked when they brought her in, but the way a person looks when they've been very far away and have come, finally, a little distance back. "How's the arm?" Priya asked, nodding toward the IV. "Sore. Is that normal?" "Very." Priya checked the line, noted the rate, made a small adjustment. "You'll need at least 3 more days of IV antibiotics. Probably 4. I can't stay 4 days. You have a serious systemic infection and a dog who has, from what I can tell, not eaten in approximately 24 hours. Priya looked at her steadily. "You are staying 4 days." Celine's jaw did the thing. Then, slowly, it undid itself. "He'll need to go out," she said. "I'll arrange it. There's a green space behind the hospital. Dominique has a brother who trains sled dogs. She's not afraid of him." "A beat. You organized that already. I had some time while your fever was breaking." Priya pulled the stool over and sat down. "What's he going to do when you go back to Chapleau? What do you mean?" "I mean, what is Fable going to do when you go back to that cabin And it's just the two of you again and nothing changes." She said it gently, but she said it. "Because I think you know what he's been doing, and I think you know it's not good for him." Celine looked at the dog. In the low light of the bay, with the ER settling into its overnight rhythm outside the door, Fable looked almost ordinary, a big dog slightly graying at the muzzle, sleeping on someone's feet the way dogs have always slept on feet. "He's been guarding me," she said. "Yes, because he thinks I need it. Do you think he's wrong?" A very long pause. "Devon used to say," Celine started and then stopped, and started again. "Devon said that dogs don't lie to you about what they see. They might be wrong. Their instincts can misfire. They can be fooled. But they don't lie. If Fable thinks I need guarding, then something I'm doing is telling him I do. What would you need to change?" She looked at the window. Outside, it was dark and very cold, and Northern Ontario was doing what it always did in February, which was make the world feel very small and very far from anywhere. But the light above the nursing station was on, and down the hall someone was laughing at something, and the monitors beeped with their small, steady certainties. "I don't know yet," Celine said, "but maybe that's not the worst place to start." Fable's tail moved again. Slow, once, as if to say, "That's enough for now. That's more than enough." Justine drove her home 4 days later, in a rented Jeep with Fable taking up most of the back seat, and a bag of medications in a pharmacy envelope tucked between them on the center console. It was a Tuesday, and the sky was the particular pale grey of February in the north, the kind of day that felt like a held breath. "I'm not moving back to Hamilton," Celine said, somewhere around the Biscoe turnoff. "I know. I like it up here. I know going to ask." "You were thinking about asking." "I'm always thinking about asking." Justine glanced at her briefly. "But I'm not asking. You're a grown woman and you know what you need." "I think I might call Devon's mother," Celine said. The words came out quieter than she meant them to. "I haven't talked to her since the service. I kept thinking I'd know what to say when I was ready. But maybe—" She paused. "Maybe you don't wait until you're ready." Justine nodded. She didn't make it a bigger thing than it was. That was one of the things Celine had always relied on about her, the ability to receive something without turning it into a ceremony. In the back seat, Fable had his nose pressed to the gap at the top of the window. The cold air caught his fur and ruffled it. His eyes were half closed. He looked, for the first time in a long time, like a dog who had nowhere in particular to be. The logging road appeared, and Justine turned onto it without being told. The spruce closed in on either side, the road narrowed, and the sound of other traffic fell away entirely. The creek came into view below the tree line, still frozen, still nameless. The cabin looked the same as Celine had left it, which it was, of course. It was only 4 days, but it looked different to her somehow. Or maybe she looked at it differently. The same 2 rooms, the same wood stove that would need stoking, the same porch over the unnamed creek, the same silence. Fable scrambled out of the back the moment Justine opened the door and stood in the snow for a moment, his nose going in 3 directions at once, his ears up, cataloguing everything that had changed in 4 days. A deer had been through, something smaller along the creek edge. The world had moved on in its small ways while they were gone, and it required examination. Then he looked back at Celine, not the watchful, protective, "I am your last line of defense" look, just a dog looking at the person he belonged to, asking with his whole body what happened next. She picked up the pharmacy envelope. She picked up her bag. She looked at the cabin and the creek and the pale grey sky, and Fable watching her from the snow. "All right," she said, to him, "to all of it, let's go."